Okay.
All right. Soccer's corrupt. The game isn't what it is anymore, or it was anymore. The integrity of the game is tarnished. Growing up in a soccer-oriented family and around soccer-oriented friends, I hear that a lot. And the reason for that is FIFA. For those of you who don't know, FIFA is the organization that basically runs soccer. It's the organization that every other organization answers to. It is in charge of all the professional leagues. It writes and administers the laws of the game, and it organizes events like the World Cup. And it's run by the president, Sepp Blatter. Also, FIFA has a significant negative effect on the sporting world, and that's going to be my claim. It has a negative effect on the field, has a negative effect off the field, and it has a negative effect for people who aren't even involved in the sport in the first place. On the field, you have a lot of bribery going on with referees, believe it or not. I hate when people say, oh, the ref ruined that game. Well, there are cases where that's actually happening. All these examples of referee bribery, just so you know, are from an article written by Susan Mohammed. Spain and Russia, they were bidding on the host nation to host the 2018 World Cup. And Spain and Russia had a bribe going on where Spain said, we'll vote for Russia to host the 2018 World Cup if your referees call the games in our favor. Also, in November 2009, this sparked a mass investigation into refereeing, the result of which was a whole bunch of top-ranking, actually famous referees being fired. One of them was a Chinese referee named Liu Jun. He's a World Cup referee. He's also known as the Golden Whistle for how neutral he is when he calls games. He's currently being investigated. He suffers the death penalty if he's found guilty of bribery. There's also inconsistent punishments being administered. There are a lot of examples of this. I'll use the most recent one, John Terry and Luis Suarez. Luis Suarez is a Uruguayan forward who was recently suspended 8 games for a racial comment that I can't repeat. And then I think it was a couple months later, John Terry, an English defender, was banned for 4 games for the same offense. And when you run into these inconsistent punishments, it's important because the way the sport is played is being altered. Because once you see that a ref's calls are being suspect, you kind of have to adjust your play. Also, unfair advantages are being given, as you can see through the Suarez-John Terry thing. They get their star forward for 4 more games than the other team gets their star defender for the same offense. Now, you may be wondering, why is it important off the field then? What does that have to do with the sporting world? Well, the multitude of scandals known worldwide that FIFA is a part of has the fan community thinking that the sport is corrupt, and that obviously is bad for the sport. An example of this off-the-field effect, members are using their position as FIFA members for their own gain. For example, there was a representative of Trinidad and Tobago who was trying to use $4 million of FIFA funds to fund an educational center at home. It's a noble cause, but it's illegal. And then you had a representative from Paraguay who apparently was using his position to try to get knighted. And then you had members of FIFA who require of the FIFA World Cup host nation to declare FIFA members tax exempt when they visit. In addition to this, you have the World Cup host nation process. Let me explain this to you. Basically, each country has one vote, and they vote on which nation hosts the World Cup every 4 years. 2 members of the executive committee, which it's basically like the board of members of FIFA. 2 members were suspended after selling their votes to people. 2 different members, this is according to an investigation done by the Sunday Times, 2 members were paid $1.5 million each to vote for Qatar for their 2022 bid. 2 other members were found guilty of bribing Caribbean voters to support Qatar in 2022. Now you may be wondering, what is Qatar? It's a pretty obscure, tiny country in the Middle East. And the reason it's won the bid for hosting the 2022 World Cup is because of who Andres Cala from the Christian Science Monitor calls the second most popular man in FIFA, Mohammed bin Hanam. He represents Qatar. And basically, he was running against Sepp Blatter to be elected president, and he had allegations coming against him that he bribed people for votes for Qatar. And upon doing that, he dropped out of the race. And on top of all of this, the FIFA General Secretary sent out an email to members that was leaked that flat out said, word for word, Qatar bought the World Cup. And this whole concept of rigging keeps the powerful powerful. FIFA has only had 2 presidents in 37 years. Sepp Blatter, the former president, Hau Havelange, had an investigation of bribery going against him. He was a friend of current President Sepp Blatter, so Sepp Blatter halted the investigation. It also has FIFA has a negative effect on those who aren't involved. And that's important because FIFA represents the sport. FIFA is the sport. You have FIFA, the franchise of video games, it is the sport. And it therefore gives the sport a bad reputation through the effects it has on those not involved. Gender equality groups are up in arms because Sepp Blatter recently recommended for women's soccer, this is the president of FIFA, that we tighten the shorts and tighten women's shorts to emphasize a more female aesthetic. And then you had the executive committee and the women's committee fully composed of men. Last time I checked, sports aren't a gender-exclusive concept. Then you have gay rights groups up in arms. Sepp Blatter recently recommended to homosexual couples during the World Cup that they don't partake in homosexual activity because Qatar bans homosexual acts. And then you have worker rights group up in arms because they have been, I don't actually have evidence for this, but it's been kind of like a conspiracy that there's been underpaying and mistreating of World Cup employees. And also you go back to the accusation of John Terry and Luis Suarez. There are racial equality groups up in arms too about this. I'm not saying that they have racist motives, but they're saying that when you give inconsistent punishments to 2 people of different races, you run into problems there. And the fact that you have people even talking about these problems, you have the idea in people's heads that this is an unfair sport, it's corrupt, and therefore it has a negative effect on the sporting world.
All right, I thought you had a pretty dramatic statement to get our attention. The claim is clearly stated, although the way it's introduced is a little bit awkward. There's a pretty solid layout of what the structure is going to be. Internally, I was picking out those points. I think your transitions could be a little bit sharper for a general audience, but it wasn't that hard to follow what you were saying. Your proof, I think, needs to be a little bit more consistently cited. All the examples you cite from this one person, I assume that they wrote an article or a book or something, and I think you definitely want to give us some qualifications on that. I heard a reference to the Sunday Times at one point, and then there's some other information that it comes from a variety of places, and I think that you want to be more consistent in emphasizing the authorities or the independence of those organizations, institutions, or persons who are citing those things, especially about the corruption and the bribery issues. The bribery and corruption issues seem to be the strongest element of your argument. The impact that has on the game, I think, needs to be developed a bit more, because even though people, we want you to call it in favor of this in our teams, and we'll vote for Qatar, that sort of thing. I'm going, okay, well, did they do that? Have there been any cases where they can say at the game, somebody changed the outcomes of the games or affected the way the play was being made? You at one point said, clearly, if people know something's going on, they're going to change the way they play the game. And I'm going, okay, well, I don't know how clearly that is, and if you've got an example, that would be helpful. Of course, it's tough to have examples. You went 7 minutes and 39 seconds, so it was a little bit long. Now you've given me a great argument why soccer sucks. Thank you.